Let the Spirit and the bride say, "Come." Let everyone who hears say, "Come." And let everyone who is thirsty come. Let anyone who wishes to take the water of life as a gift. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts always be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. There are things that still come in the mail to us most of the time. Not everything's been supplanted by some kind of electronic message, but there are, several things have been, and in fact, the thing I'm going to show you here in a second came to us in multiple modes. And in fact, I've been in the business of sending out this type of mail in multiple modes as well, both digitally and kind of corporeally, physically here. And this is something that came to the church this week. And it says, God willing and the people of God consenting, the Right Reverend Stephen Andrew Miller, Bishop of Milwaukee, will ordain Esther Ann Kramer, Nancy Hills, Lars, David Jackson Skoglund, what a long name, Daniel Paul Spores, to the Sacred Order of Deacons in Christ's one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Now, I didn't get this. It's not just an announcement that the bishop is going to do something and we need to be aware of it. The reason it is sent to us is because you all have been invited to participate in the ordination of Esther Ann Kramer, Nancy Hills, we're just going to call him Lars, and then Daniel Paul Spores. And if you want to come and participate in that, you can come to the Cathedral Church of All Saints at 818 East Juneau Avenue in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on Saturday, June the 11th, 2016, at 10 o'clock in the morning. Fat chance you'll get there by then, so unless you spend the night. But the reason I brought this out, or I was thinking about this week, is this is actually one of the things that you still get in the mail often. In fact, I'm guessing you all have gotten invitations to all sorts of things that happen in May and June here. Things like weddings, things like graduation parties. There could be showers that go around those things. Lots of babies get born in August because it's cold in January, and so you might have gotten an invitation for one of those too. And we like it when we get invitations. I want you to think about how you feel when one comes in the mail. There are several feelings. There's sometimes the feeling like, I've already got something to do on this day. How am I going to do this? And you might start to feel guilty that you can't make it there. And the reason you start to feel guilty that you can't make it there is because you know an invitation is an important thing, and it's something that you want to honor. You have been invited to participate in a special moment of somebody's life in some way. And not all invitations are to big events. We get smaller events like birthday parties, or you might just get an event that's something just for something to drink and a nibble to eat, just so that you can be with that person. But regardless of the invitation, you feel responsibility to keep it. And the reason you feel that is because you are honored to get it. Getting an invitation to something means that you have been included in a special group of folks that know this person and care for this person. And you might just be invited to come and be and hang out with them, but you might also be invited to come, as in the case of a wedding, or in the case of this ordination, or in the case of a baptism, to come and not just be an observer or witness of that event, to be a participant in it as well. That you are going to stand there with those folks. And in fact, we have it in all of our liturgies of the church. Whenever we have marriages and ordinations and baptisms, you all have to make commitments that day as well to be the support structure for those people. And let me tell you, you don't invite people to come and support you that you don't like or you don't think have support to give you. The other thing is, when you think about inviting people, you often think about inviting people that have had a role to play in your life in some way. It's not just that they're going to participate in that day when they come to that event. They have already participated in such a way that you have gotten to that event together. And so you're honored not only as someone whom they love and care for, but you are honored as a collaborator with them as well. You have all that in your mind. Think about that last invitation that came in the mail. Think how you responded to it, how you felt. And now I'm just going to remind you that when we opened the book of Revelation 6 weeks ago, I told you it was something. It was a piece of postal writing that came in the mail. And today, when we get to the end of this letter, guess what it is? It's a really long, strange, bizarre invitation to come to something and be there. Because after all is said, after rivers have turned to blood, after armies have ravaged the face of the earth in this kind of really dramatic, this apocalyptic vision of the end of the world, at the end of it, everybody is invited to come and be in the place that's new and restored. The contrast of the way that we have treated the planet and treated each other and brought it to its own demise is the city that God has built. And he's inviting us to come in through those gates. And everybody's invited to come. The Spirit and the bride say, come. Let everybody who hears them say, come. Say, come. Everybody who's thirsty, come. You have been invited. And not only have you been invited to come and be there, but you also have been invited to bring others to come and be there as well. If you don't know who they are, you got to find those folks who are thirsty and invite them in as well. And all of those things that we say about the other invitations, where it might just be an invitation to come and be present with a person and to share a meal. It might be a way that we come because we have collaborated. In fact, the gospel story tells us we are participants in this narrative of God. We are not just observers of it. We are the ones that God is using and threading in and through history to build this renewed city. You are invited. In whatever sense of honor that you feel when you get that invitation to somebody's wedding or baptism or graduation, it's only a shadow of what it feels like to be invited to the kingdom. Now, I'll give you the objection to this, unless you've thought of it already. Maybe you have inside of yourself, which is, this invitation's different than that one I got for the wedding. Because I know with weddings, the bride and the groom and their family have to sit down and they say, I've got just a limited amount of resources here. Not everybody can come to the soiree we're going to hold. And there has to be some limits put on it. That is one reason we feel so honored when we get that invitation. We know that that person who's dealing with such a boundary for what they're going to invite has included us in that group. That of all the people they know in the world, they're deciding that they're going to spend their $15 a plate rubber chicken dinner on us that night. So when we get this invitation at the end of this very strange, long, violent book that is in the very back of our Bible, that the early church fathers and mothers had a very difficult time trying to decide whether they were going to keep in here or not, God is not a God with resource limitations. That's why everybody's invited. And that invitation raises two problems with us kind of behaviorally. One is, and I've talked about before, you would think God was the poorest entity in the universe if you ever came to a vestry meeting. And there is no limitation to the resources that God has, which is why there should be no limitation to who's invited. But there is a second objection. And then though we would never maybe vocalize this, though sometimes people do vocalize it, we would never want to be invited to something everybody got invited to. That seems to remove the special nature of that invitation. But I'm telling you, everybody's invited because God has no limited resources. And because that's what God created us all to be in the first place, which is invitations to a perfect place. And that is something that we have to sit and think in ourselves really hard about if we want to have the mind of Christ who's inviting people here. Are we threatened that other people whom we don't like and don't look like us, and I won't put any labels on them this morning, though I'm tempted to, when we think that that invitation is not for them, or the specialness that we have with God has been degraded because everybody's been invited. And that's work for us to do. That's that process of being made holy and sanctified. Not only to realize that God's limited resources are unlimited, but he's exerting them to invite everybody. And that doesn't make us less special. And it certainly doesn't make them excluded. Now, the book of Revelation, we can't just have that bit of it, though. We can't have this book that's had these very kind of disturbing images throughout and then get to the end of it and all of a sudden like, oh, none of that ever happened. Because it does show us this image of the folks that just don't accept the invitation. You don't go to everything you're invited to, and the world doesn't go to everything it's invited to as well. And it tells us why they don't. It tells us that the people that resist this invitation do so for a very specific reason. And it has nothing to do with their lifestyle or their behavior or their religion necessarily. It has to do with the fact that they chose to love something more than to love God. And that is a choice that we all have to make. It's not just one we have to make. It's one we get to make. And that's the other part of the soul searching that's involved in this invitation. Just like you do when you get conflicting invitations. They're the same time, the same day. You got to pick between them. This invitation that God is extending requires that you choose God's invitation first. And you worship him and love him more than anything else. Because those behaviors that are listed there, they're really just choosing to love something else more than one loves God. Do you love God enough to accept the invitation? Now, the last bit of this letter, which is actually my favorite kind of letter to get, which you would never actually get in a paper letter anymore. In fact, if it was sent to you in a paper letter, it would be worthless because the guest would arrive before the paper letter would. And that is that the end of this letter tells us that Jesus is coming. He's coming to visit. And you know why this is the last thing here? Because people miss Jesus. We just had a whole feast day on Thursday. It's such an odd thing that we do every year to celebrate that Jesus left us here and leaves for 10 days without the Holy Spirit. So the very last thing at the end of this letter, invitations are nice, but knowing that somebody who loves us is coming to visit us is better. And the thing that I find even more intriguing, you see, why would you invite somebody to come to your place if you were going to their place? And I think this has to do with the motion of the gospel. And that is, we are all working towards God, but God is coming towards us at the same time. This is not all one-sided. We don't just sit here and wait for God to come and pluck us up. And we also, it's not one-sided where we've got to do everything or God's will won't get done. That's equally heretical, to think that God's will and sovereignty for this world is dependent on the fact that we make the right choice all the time. But it is a combo, because we have been invited to accept that invitation, to go to that place that God has prepared for us, while at the same time we are building and participating and traveling towards that place as God comes nearer to us. If we're both traveling towards each other, there's only one thing that can happen. Collision. That the gospel will be most fully realized when we arrive together at the same place, us traveling towards God and God traveling towards us. No one more important, no one less important. All invited, all received, all being visited.